95.
Sarabjit.
So we have received around 95 questions across the country, and we have compiled, and based on those questions, we have arranged those questions as per the uh, into the topics. Okay. So we decided that a wide range of questions we have organized for today's session into a smooth clinical flow. And we will move from fertility basics to female and male fertility, and then to PCOS, preconception care, pregnancy nutrition, complication, postnatal nutrition, and finally the short wrap off. Okay, in that short wrap off, basically whatever questions you have during the session, you can post that in the chat box. Okay, and the many of your questions were around the fertility, ovulation, and PCOS and PCOD. I think most of the people they sent questions on related to the PCOS and PCOD, micronutrients, male fertility, trimester-wise nutrition, gestational diabetes, thyroid, miscarriage, and many questions related to the some topics. Okay, so before I hand over uh, this to ma'am, just a brief introduction. So today's speaker is, we all know, Lata ma'am. Lata ma'am is today's speaker, and she is, yeah, she is a chief nutritionist and head of clinical nutrition and dietetics depart from the Fernandez Hospital, Hyderabad. So before we start, I just want to thank you, ma'am. And just one important message: the fertility nutrition does not start after the pregnancy is confirmed. It start much earlier. And to this to the ma'am.
Thank you, Sarabjit. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
So, at the outset, it's indeed an honor and privilege to be a part of this series of Ask Anything as the Expert, and sincerely congratulate the Meerut chapter, Kritika, and the organizing team, and Ms. Anju for inviting me over here. This area of fertility and maternal nutrition, yes, as you rightly started, the first why is it that nutrition matters is quite a pertinent question. I would like to start by saying that when we talk of fertility and maternal nutrition, we are actually talking of a continuum. We are not just saying of one physiological age or one particular area. We are talking of right from women's nutrition that starts, must be from menarche, or right now we are going to talk on from preconception over the phases of actually ovulation and implantation, moving over the phases of pregnancy, postnatal period. Why is it important? Each one of you in the audience have been hearing about the first 1,000 days. So every human being on this earth, the nutritional status is actually decided by that status that the little conceptus gets. So it is the nutritional status of the mother. In fact, it is said what the grandmother ate would actually decide what this conceptus status is. So health and nutrition of a woman is very important right from the genetic phase, like the germinal plasma, we are talking of eggs, ova, and that's what is finally joining into a conceptus. So, nutrition of women decides the nutrition of every human being, is what I take it on. And that is why we need to really be very, very pertinently counseling every pregnancy or in fact bad matter, every woman in their reproductive phase that nutrition preconceptionally, that is, nutrition even before they get pregnant, has to be looked into. It's just not enough to say, okay, after I get pregnant, I will eat well. It doesn't work. It always starts much before. So, nutrition, the role of nutrition in fertility. What is the importance? The short answer is it creates that internal environment in which conception, pregnancy, and a healthy fetal development can happen.
Thank you, ma'am, for this specifically gives us a strong base. So let us know more how the nutrition affect the female fertility specifically.
I see that a large group of participants have actually spoken or asked queries on ovulation, female fertility, importance of nutrition and hormones, and thereafter. Yes, there is enough evidence which definitely puts on that female fertility is closely linked with the body's metabolic and hormonal balance. Starting right from energy intake. If the energy intake is either too low or too high, it can impact ovulation and it can be disturbed. Why does this happen? The two important female hormones related with fertility, estrogen and progesterone, are very closely related to nutritional status. So, the important concept we should always remember in the reproductive system is how very sensitive it is to various stress signals of the body. So, these signals may come from either being undernourished, it can combat being their obese, insulin resistance, micronutrient deficiencies, or just irregular eating patterns. Any of these stress factors can actually cause an impact on the fertility. So, when nutrition is poor, the regular ovulation becomes irregular, cycles are abnormal, and then the hormonal imbalance. So, in that way, it does reduce fertility. Now, let's talk about what nutrients then are we looking at. The most important nutrient when we look at fertility, preconception, and pregnancy is, of course, folates or the folic acid. One very important B vitamin, which is important right from the cell division stage to the fetal development. Next, of course, is iron, which supports ovulatory function. Zinc is again involved in a couple of hormones regulation. And vitamin D is now more well recognized as working as a hormone. It has a very important role in reproductive health. In fact, it's become mandatory now to supplement vitamin D for women preconceptionally if they are deficient and during pregnancy every month of pregnancy from the 16th week onwards till their birth, till their delivery, they are actually supplemented with vitamin D. So vitamin D is very, very important. I will just tell you all more about it as we go to the further in the questions. Apart from that, the other important mineral is of course iodine. It's also relevant, as you all know, from relation to the thyroid health. Now, as I was saying, most of your questions I've seen that asked about the relation of estrogen, progesterone, and how they support food. And what are the foods that most of your questions plot that? Please understand, there is no single food that you can say will support estrogen or progesterone. So the first thing to remember is, as per the nutritional status, we need to look at providing a balanced diet, taking care that there is enough good quality proteins, fiber-rich foods, healthy fats, and all these provided from the variety or the diverse dietary sources. When we look at nuts and seeds from a concept of healthy fats, we definitely will be looking at what are these nuts and seeds providing in which terms. So if you're looking at specifically progesterone, yes, vitamin B6 and magnesium have known to be supportive. So all foods rich in vitamin B6 and magnesium can be targeted when they are looking at the fertility phase of increased progesterone. Now, also we need to understand that what comes as negative impact on these two hormones. So all foods which are high in fat, high in salt, high in sugars, in a nutshell, all the processed refined foods, all the foods which are more of an inflammatory nature have to be avoided to enhance the function or to support estrogen progesterone. Right? Now, what else matters? The body mass index. It's very important to remember that an ideal body mass index is very essential for a woman who's planning her pregnancy. Most of them who are having concerns with infertility, the first thing to look at is, are they at that ideal BMI? When I say ideal, I'm not talking of only obese, even the undernourished. Both the extremes are bad. It does not support the fertility hormones. So BMI on a normal range between 18.5 to max 25 would be good. As we know, for Asians, it's only 18.5 to 23. But anything above 25, we need to be counseling and suggesting strategies to help the woman come back to her ideal BMI. For the low BMI categories, we definitely need to tell her the importance of the body fat. I hope all of you all remember, when we look at the body composition, women need to have a minimum percentage of 25% of body fat to help these hormones function. So it's not that there are a group of women now who actually have lost in the journey of losing weight, have actually deprived themselves of the fats in their system. That also causes disturbances in their hormones and hence in their menstrual cycle and then leading to infertility. So BMI, both high and low, have to be managed to get it to the ideal BMI. There were also a couple of questions I seen on scanty and painful periods and what should the nutrition be here. Now, first important, of course, nutrition will help here by supporting stable blood sugars, correcting the deficiencies. So usually checking on if there is iron deficiency, are they anemic? That would help in supporting this. Improving the anti-inflammatory, taking off, as I said, the anti-inflammatory foods, supporting with foods or nutrients like omega-3 fats, trying to include in foods which would support and come and support the inflammation that is possible in this. We should also remember that these persistent menstrual disturbances need, of course, medical evaluation. So it's not that only with diet. There are some young women who are very frantic, telling, I don't want to take any medications. I will just do what nutrition can do, ma'am. That will not work. We need to get them to counsel to them to understand that when there is a medical support required, it needs to be taken. Hormones cannot be completely corrected by only diet. Diet will complement and support, but if need be, as medical advice suggests, they have to get in for that also. Right? Sarabjit, have we covered all that under this?
Yes, ma'am, we have covered all the questions. So basically, the basic questions from this topic was, what is the main role of nutrition in fertility? How does the nutrition affect the female fertility and ovulation? And how does the nutrition affect the influence of ovulation and fertility in women? So all these questions we have covered. And thank you, ma'am, for your help. This part was very helpful. And the next topic from where we got most of the questions. So that is, I think, the area of interest of our participants, that is PCOS and PCOD. So, ma'am, can you guide us on this topic?
Yes. Polycystic ovarian syndrome is basically the incidence. In my years of last 20 years of practice, I have seen the incidence ever on the increase. And this has been a challenge across the healthcare group, right from the gynecologists and all other healthcare groups, including the dietitians. I call it a challenge because it's a very complex hormonal condition. It's an endocrine metabolic condition, and the woman has to go through phases which are very, very erratic. It has a lot of social implication also. So it helps on. So basically, the three main parameters we should understand in polycystic ovarian syndrome is as per the Rotterdam criteria. Either there is insulin resistance, so any one of these, insulin resistance, irregular ovulation, or as we call anovulation, and excess androgens, the male hormone. So any one of these, if is there, is diagnosed or is categorized as PCOS. Now, it is I'm not saying it's the only infertility related condition, but one of the common infertility related conditions. So first I would like to clear this confusion here that there is this confusion between PCOD and PCOS. Now, we all need to understand that, as I earlier said, this is a metabolic hormonal condition. So it is a syndrome. So we don't need to label it as a disease. Polycystic ovarian disease is no longer. Actually, both are clinically the same. But gynecologists now are very clearly telling us it need not be targeted and labeled as a disease. It is a syndrome. So it's PCOS. It's a broader condition, as I said. And the main fertility issue in PCOS is, of course, the irregularity in the ovulation. So here we need to look at from a nutritional angle, again, starting with BMI, whether, again, here there was a lot of a misconception always that women with PCOS are always obese. Now that, again, is not true. We have a category of lean PCOS also. Now what is this? This group of women have their BMI very much or within their range, but they still have the other one of the three parameters deranged. That is, either they have androgen excess or they have an insulin resistance, which is common. So we need to look into the nutritional modifications accordingly. So when we are giving in the nutritional modifications, we are looking at first a very good history taking. We need to really look at the nutritional assessment from the point of, are there any parameters here that's coming in way of her dietary intake, coming in way of her insulin resistance? This is very important because if you have to address what are the foods already in her daily intake that is impacting it. Second, we need to always look at how long she has been going through it. What are the other stress factors? Always we need to look at diet along with their lifestyle to address PCOS. It cannot be done just individually here, right? So the main issue being ovulation and insulin resistance. What will the dietary changes would be targeted at low glycemic index foods with optimal protein intake coming in. Very important to, as I said, avoiding all the inflammatory sources. So all the high processed and refined foods needs to be avoided. So all the high sugar, high fat, and high salt also. The other important component when we look at diet and nutrition for managing PCOS, we always have to look at what are the sources of calcium that the woman is taking in. There's always a myth here on no dairy or no gluten. I call it still a myth because there is no conclusive evidence that a woman with PCOS has to avoid gluten or avoid dairy products. Now, from a point of inflammation, yes, if the woman is inflammatory to wheat products, yes, we would. But it's not a uniform standard recommendation to avoid. Similarly with dairy. In fact, there is enough evidence to say that about 2 to 3 servings of low-fat dairy products is supportive for conditions like endometriosis, which is again another condition which can come along with hormone because of the hormonal change. So, inclusion of dairy has to be there, but the target of low fat has to be stressed, either 1% fat or lesser. So, the double toned or slim milk and milk products can be recommended. The other products, when I say of essential fats, from an anti-inflammatory component, we are talking of, for the non-vegetarian, the marine fish. For nuts and seeds, of course, walnuts are very helpful in inclusion. But all these comes into your diet plan with the base of the calorie requirement per day. So the first step is to identify at what level her body weight is, and based on the calorie requirements, then include these food groups to meet these nutrients. So the goals should be clear. Diet should help in improving insulin sensitivity. I think all of you heard in the first session itself from the metabolic syndrome condition, what all are the foods and the diets that you can include for insulin sensitivity, foods that reduce inflammation and support the weight normalization. Definitely, whatever of the foods can help in improving cycle regularity. So the micronutrients in terms of including B vitamins, specifically as I earlier said, B6, zinc and magnesium have to be looked into. But when we look at a diverse diet where we are looking at every food group, these nutrients are met. We don't have any evidence of giving these micronutrients as supplements. It is all dietary sources. So always remember, it's a process. No crash diets or no immediate impact will help this group of women because there's a lot of hormonal changes that is causing the change in. So we have to be very clear, counsel the women to be patient. It is a lifestyle change that she has to come on. Sleep hygiene becomes very important along with managing diet. And finally, of course, exercise has to come in, and very specifically, resistance exercises has to be included because only then the fat loss is there. So we're talking of a diet which is low GI, moderate protein, rich in antioxidants, sleep hygiene, and the diet going in the regular dietary pattern, regular eating intervals. And finally, exercise, concentrating on, of course, cardio, but definitely including the resistance exercises also. When I told of timing of eating, of late, I mean, we had recently a session on PCOS, in fact, by our endocrinologist. He actually gave in a new concept of telling, why don't you also talk of the 4 different phenotypes, dietary phenotypes? That is, which diet do we do for helping the woman with her weight loss? There might be a woman who has a phenotype of comfortable eating from 12 o'clock in the noon to 6 o'clock. If her system adapts it, we can continue with her dietary. So it's not necessary that intermittent fasting works for everyone. It will not. We need to do our assessment. First, assess whether the woman is, which type of phenotype. Is she an early riser? Is she a late sleeper? Is she comfortable with 2 meals? Or then decide into which phenotype she comes into and work around the dietary modifications. That way, there is more compliance and more results for these women with hormonal imbalances.
So, ma'am, there are few more questions related to this. So, one very interesting question, that how to counsel the women who are tired of repeated diet failures.
True. This is a common thing, a very good question. This is a common thing that happens with women with PCOS because they have been trying their best always and they always come back into the thing. So, the best counseling I would always suggest is, as I just said, first assess where they are missing or what they are missing. There's always a deficiency I have realized in the way, in the struggle of losing weight, they keep taking off of many food groups of their list, and there's always a deficiency that sets in. And that could be causing a imbalance in the way they are eating. So identify it. Are they actually sitting hungry, starving themselves to lose weight? Then there is the stress, and the cortisol itself is going to not cause them. So always counseling starts with a very good assessment of their present dietary intake. Once you have assessed that, you have identified where it is, counsel them to be taking it slowly. It's very important to tell them that even if they lose 5% of their present weight, they will start seeing changes in their hormones. For women who are going through infertility, we advise them to lose just 10%. They might be at the BMI of 40. Still, they are told just target 10% of your present weight for getting into conception. But those young girls with PCOS and just before their preconception and that group, we could tell them to take it in phases. Target 5 to 10% of your present weight, maintain that weight, and then move on if you want still for the next. So that is one way to give them. So always don't talk to them in terms of their weight, in terms of kgs. Talk to them in terms of the percentage loss that we are targeting, because that gets lot of clinical parameters back to normal. Insulin actually sensitivity improves. Then giving them tips and strategies on how to improve that insulin sensitiveness. Things like telling them how important breakfast is, giving them incidences of telling why the insulin hormone is more resistant there. So try to eat a good protein based breakfast to start your day. Tips like between the lean and obese PCOS, they have enough studies which are showing that for the lean PCOS, always give a higher calorie at breakfast and a little lesser at dinner. This is the main difference we need to do for the lean PCOS. The other PCOS, I mean, those who are obese, you can always go ahead with the regular pattern. But inclusion of a protein and adequate fiber at each of the major meals keeps them satiated, isn't it? So that itself gives them a feeling of, oh, I'm not missing anything. What they have to avoid are, of course, the high fat, specifically the saturated fats, the trans fats. This is causing more inflammation. So we need to guide them on these are the fats you have to avoid. You could still have the other fats that you're taking. Timing of eating, late night eating definitely has an impact on the insulin sensitivity. So we need to guide them and counsel them to come on. So small changes, I always tell them, let's take this week just 2 areas to modify. The following after 2 weeks, let's take 2 other areas. So I believe that that way we build up their confidence and slowly show them targets on those small targets, and it's possible to. And don't give them large weight loss targets. It's not easy for a woman with PCOS.
Thank you, ma'am, for sharing your knowledge. And one more question, a very short one. Can dietary interventions alone can improve hormonal balance naturally without any supplementation except for folic acid in PCOS for conception? And is there any evidence for fetal programming through dietary modification?
See, only only dietary changes for infertility. It depends on what the condition is. So I can't outright tell you an answer saying, can we do it? I believe in that we have to work as a interconnecting with our gynecologist and the fetal medicine expert always. Please look into the notes of the gynecologist. What is that in their pre-pregnancy they have put down the areas. You cannot say that we can target a lady who's been having recurrent miscarriages and she's going. You can't tell that only diet will correct it. So it depends on the condition, first thing. So we can't outright give a blanket thing that only diet can change the hormonal changes. Now, coming to supplementation, Folic acid, as of now in India, we have only folic acid as a recommended supplement to be given preconceptionally. The prenatal vitamins which are given in other countries, we have not started on it yet. So our recommendations is only folic acid till 16th week of pregnancy, that is till their 4th month. And after that only will the other iron folic tablets, calcium and all that start. So the major thing for first organ development and the first thing is only folic acid. No other supplements have been started yet.
Okay, so thank you, ma'am. And this was the one of the most important sections where we got most of the questions. And let's now bring the most neglected topic and but equally important, that is the male fertility. So, ma'am, can you explain that in short? What is the nutrition which is required for male fertility?
In terms
Uh,
of male fertility, in terms of male fertility, the first thing or most commonly related thing is the sperm count or the sperm motility, which has to be addressed. And for this, dietary or nutrition impact is shown. There's enough evidence to show that we can modify that. Apart from that is, of course, their BMI. So the biggest, first important thing when we are targeting sperm count or sperm motility, we have to look at antioxidant-rich diet. Specifically, enough studies have shown on the positive impact of vitamin C-rich diet as a antioxidant. Apart from that, of course, vitamin E, zinc, and selenium have shown other antioxidants. So, vitamin C, vitamin E, zinc, and selenium are more commonly studies have shown that these can be supportive for improving the sperm motility or sperm count. Yet another important area, even in male fertility, is their body fat or the BMI, right? So this is another area that obesity is also causing lot of concerns with male infertility, because the excess adiposity does affect the testosterone balance and hence worsens the sperm quality. In addition to that, we definitely need to look into asking them to the cessation of smoking and alcohol, sleep hygiene improving is required, increasing their physical activity, correcting, as I earlier said, the deficiencies, if any, and following a balanced antioxidant-rich diet that can maintain their body weight. So this is, in a gist, what we have to be targeting for the male infertility.
Okay. So thank you, ma'am. And let's move to the preconception care and some of the more difficult fertility situations. So we had a very thoughtful questions on the preconception counseling, recurrent miscarriage, IVF nutrition, endometriosis, and supporting women who are trying for pregnancy for years. What should we approach for these cases?
So each of these clinical conditions are different. So when we get a case for preconception counseling, as I earlier said, we definitely need to go through the doctor's notes. So we need to first address, like I earlier said, if it's recurrent miscarriages. Now, for recurrent miscarriages, dietary sources or dietary intervention is not conclusive evidence. I'm not saying there is no impact, but there is no conclusive evidence that if I give her this particular nutrient, the miscarriage will go. There is lot of complex relations there of the hormones that or various other factors. But what we can counsel this group of women who are coming in is trying to avoid things like the endometrial disruptors, talk of telling them to be eating more of fresh foods, not depending more on the processed food. So there are various smaller things we all know that is coming in way of infertility. So we could actually guide them telling, try to cut off eating preserved foods where there are more preservatives that could be causing it. Endometrial disruptors like use of plastics, use of the various environmental disruptors now that is really causing environmental pollution. We should get into that. So again, this is not a generalized advice. It has to be customized to the patient's needs. So unless you know the background of the patient whom you're talking to, you should understand, are there any endocrine disruptors, then address it, right? But when it comes to IVF and those who have come in, again, a very stressful period for the woman who's going through IVF. So the first thing to address there is, again, helping her maintain weight. She has lot of hormones because for ovulation induction, there's lot of stress that is given in which actually pushes in their body weight. So we need to guide them on maintaining their weight, which is very important.
Okay, so thank you, ma'am. And let's move to the next topic. So, which is that many participants they were asked the questions about the nutrition in the first trimester, key nutrients during the pregnancy, role of DHA, EPA, folic acid, protein quality, caffeine, any recommendation of caffeine, and in the third trimester, and what are the food restrictions that are actually unnecessary. So people they put more restrictions. So what are the actual restrictions which are needed? So could you, ma'am, take us through the pregnancy trimester by trimester? I hope I am audible.
Yes, you're audible, sir.
आई थिंक मैम का कनेक्शन लॉस हो गया.
Yeah, she joined back.
ओके, प्लीज रिपीट.
Yeah. So
I'm
okay.
sorry, I missed out. Yeah.
So, ma'am, I'll repeat the questions. So many participants they have asked about the nutrition in the first trimester. Okay, what are the key nutrients during the pregnancy? DHA, EPA, folic acid, protein quality, which protein is best, caffeine intake, what are the recommendation, and in the third trimester, which foods are restrictions are unnecessary. The people they're actually saying do not eat this, do not eat this, but actually we can eat that. Could you please take us through the pregnancy trimester by trimester?
Yes. So this is a very practical way to teach maternal nutrition because always maternal nutrition during pregnancy has to be taken trimester wise because the growth of the baby, the fetus is changing and the requirement also changes each trimester. So coming to the first trimester, as we all know, the priority is the fetal development, right? So organ developments are happening. So we need to look at from a neural development point of view, we need to always look at folic acid being the most important. Recommendation is only 400 micrograms per day, but here a supplement is being given, and every day a supplement of 5 grams of folate supplement, Folivite, is given in this entire first trimester. We can, on the food end, on the dietary end, talk to them about taking green leafy vegetables.
Lata ma'am, just a second. I request all the participants to please kindly mute yourself. So, because it is disturbing the session. Thank you. Ma'am, you can continue. Sorry for interrupting.
Right, sorry. So we need to look at the dietary sources of folates also. So green leafy vegetables, specifically, you could include spinach. When we look at from the point of beans, cluster beans is a very good source. Similarly, all the chana, the whole legumes is also a good source that we can recommend on. So these are the options we need to look at, including from the dietary end. And since the first trimester, there is no recommendation for weight gain. The weight gain in pregnancy is always targeted from the second and the third trimester only. So there is no need for extra calorie requirement. It is only concentrating on the folate rich foods and eating to appetite. We also need to remember in the first trimester, most women might have nausea, vomiting. So we need to address our dietary changes for that. So if there is excessive nausea, we usually recommend them to alternate eating the wet and the dried food. So when they're having nausea, if you drink even water, they tend to throw up. So let them have a dry food, wait for another half an hour, then have the liquid. So alternating wet and dry foods help. Then, of course, including options like ginger, which is supportive for them. That is normal to each one's like and dislikes. At that point, as we know, the hormonal changes causes likes and dislikes to various foods. Never force a woman to start eating a food which she dislikes at that stage, because she only tends to grow up, right? So the first trimester, our target should be folic acid rich foods and the supplement of folates to be taken, and addressing the minimum GI conditions that the mother woman might be going through, like mainly nausea, vomiting. Moving on to the second trimester, the focus now is on the growth support. As I said, definitely we have to start looking at the weight. Now, how is weight targeted for a pregnant mother? We follow the Institute of Medicine's weight gain guidelines based on the body mass, pre-pregnancy body mass index. So if there is the pre-pregnancy body mass index is a normal BMI, then we actually tell them that they have to increase on their. Miss Mona Lisa, can you mute yourself? Thank you. So if there is basically the BMI, if the woman has started her pregnancy at the normal BMI, then we target a weight gain of 11.5 to 16 kgs. But if the BMI, as I earlier said, is the overweight category, that is pre-pregnancy, or she started her pregnancy at a BMI above 25, then we usually target a weight gain of only 9 to 11 kgs. So the question, Mani, that you've asked is that if antenatally, if she's overweight, how do you target? The first thing, our stake of consultation should start with the weight parameter. Tell them that you are started your pregnancy at an overweight. Your weight gain target has to be given to the mother. The weight gain target is about 9 to 11.5 kgs entire pregnancy. And from the 4th month, that is from the 13th week onwards, she has to target a weight gain of about 300 grams per week, which is about 1.2 kgs every month. So weight gain steadily has to go in. It should not be 8 month 4 kgs, agle month no weight gain. That also does not support a good fetal growth. So second trimester, the target is on weight gain, which we're going to counsel the mother. Then we talk of important nutrients, which are iron, calcium, and of course, protein. Now, when we talk of protein quality, we all know that we're talking of high biological value proteins. So those who are non-vegetarians, yes, we talk to them about taking eggs and only the lean meat, chicken and fish. We do not recommend on continuing with red meat. Unless they are very particular, then we reduce the intake of red meat. For the vegetarians, a good quality protein is a dairy protein. So milk and milk products up to half a liter per day. It need not be, again, I stress that we have to tell the woman to take only milk. She is not tolerating it, curds is fine. 30 grams of paneer, one serving, which is 5 to 6 pieces, is fine. We can ask them to take soybean products like the Nutrilla granules or the meal maker. So milk products, the soy products, and finally the dal and the legumes. So legumes specifically, we always advocate them to have one serving, which is about 25 to 30 grams of the sabat dals. Very important to tell them to include. Need not be taken raw, even if they're sprouting them, steam them and take it. We are looking at the food safety during pregnancy also. So always try to include one serving, which is 30 grams of legumes every day for every pregnant mother in this, right from the second trimester of her pregnancy. Moving on to the third trimester, here the growth is faster now for the fetal growth. We have to look at the maternal reserves for lactation, breastfeeding. So we again target on protein adequacy, iron and calcium adequacy, and then moving on to definitely hydration. Very, very important to keep checking on how much water are they really taking. If it is less than 2 liters, do counsel them to increase to 2.5 to 3 liters of just water. And then additional fluids can be whether they're taking their buttermilk or they're taking some lime water. But water per se, it is not fruit juices. Everyone jumps in to taking fruit juices when the minute we say hydration. No fruit juices recommended. And again, why? In this trimester, 24 to 28 weeks is when insulin resistance starts building up, and all of them can and will be going through the glucose tolerance test for checking on their gestational diabetes status. So, very important that by the time they reach the third trimester, we tell them to eat in a way that they are eating slow to digest foods, which we mean are low glycemic index foods, including adequate good quality proteins in every meal, whether it is veg or non-veg, and eating small frequent meals from when they wake up till they sleep so that they are having. And physical activity in terms of walking, we encourage them to do that also about 15 minutes, 3 times a day, so that there is a regular. So this way, we are able to manage their weight gain in the recommended phase. So major nutrients, I hope all of you are clear, is these for the 3 trimesters. When we look at the last trimester, one other is good fats. Essential fats are all what we are talking of right from. So we are including nuts and seeds. But essential fats in terms of the DHA is definitely specifically looked at in the last trimester. Also, vitamin A is specifically looked at last trimester because lung maturity requires vitamin A. Again, no supplementation, only dietary sources is what we are looking at. DHA rich foods. For the non-vegetarians, of course, we have the marine fish, salmons, and all the DHA omega-3 rich fish. Otherwise, the nuts like almonds, nuts like walnuts, chia seeds, flax seeds can be recommended for meeting this requirement. And third trimester, usually doubts or myths are from point of should we take dates, because that's a common thing that they ask about. It helps in vaginal delivery. There's no conclusive evidence, girls, from the point of dates helping, but I don't have, if they are not a gestational diabetic till then, yes, inclusion of dates is absolutely okay. We need to understand is as they move into past their 32, 34 weeks of their pregnancy, they can't eat much. Their womb is already pushing up, their stomach has become, so they need energy dense foods also. So in that respect, yes, if they eat a little dates, within 3 to 4 dates per day, nothing wrong. But for a gestational diabetic who is on diet control or who is on insulin and this one, we definitely ask them to hold on. But otherwise, dates is okay. But there is no evidence to say that that helps in smooth vaginal delivery. Anything else here? Protein quality, I hope you all are clear. We are talking of the good quality proteins when we say is high biological value proteins, right? Again, we have not been in our practice recommending a dietary supplement, an oral nutrition supplement, unless we notice a nutrition inadequacy in their intake. That is, they are not able to take legumes. They feel they cannot tolerate egg or this one. They cannot tolerate milk products. Yes, when there is a nutritional inadequacy, when you notice in their intake as pregnancy is advancing, we can use a oral nutrition supplement. But a balanced nutrition supplement will be enough. We need not go for those high protein supplements. Just a balanced nutrition just to meet up their requirement can be planned on based on our assessment.
So thank you, ma'am. This was a very clear trimester-wise explanation. So let's move to the special clinical categories. In fact, I can see in the live chat, many questions are related to the GDM, thyroid, hypertension, and sleep. Okay, so can you please put more light on how to manage the diabetes, hypothyroid, and what are the meal timings, blood pressure, and the pregnancy after 35? So, ma'am, there are a few questions related to the pregnancy after 35 and sleep disturbance. What nutrition advices can we give chamomile tea in that particular case? So over to you, ma'am.
In fact, Sarabjit, each of this is an 1 hour discussion for me. Diet in during pregnancy complications is a vast topic in itself. I mean, gestational diabetes itself is same thing with hypertension. So I hope I'll do justice by giving you a gist of it. To start with, gestational diabetes, again, the incidence is on the rise. It's not like we had seen 5 years back. We have ever day the incidence increasing. So any change or glucose intolerance that's observed in any stage of pregnancy is categorized as GDM. So we have now the guidelines which tells us that if a woman gets pregnant with certain risk factors like high BMI, has a family history of diabetes, has a her gestational, she had an early pregnancy, she had earlier pregnancy, she had diabetes. So certain such parameters, the obstetrician can ask for an early OGT. That is, she already has a risk because of her high BMI, because of her history. They will ask for an early OGTT in the 16th week, that is in the 4th month itself. Otherwise, regularly the oral glucose tolerance test is done in the 24 to 28 weeks, which is basically the 7th month. Now, if a glucose intolerance is observed in terms of OGTT, I don't know, at the public facility, we don't do a HbA1c, but most of our private hospitals, they do at the first, when they come in for the first trimester itself, in the routine test, we do a HbA1c also. So if HbA1c is above 6, they also are put into the high risk category of checking their OGTT at 16th week. Now, but in the public facilities, we don't have that. Only the other parameters, they check the OGTT. Okay, so OGTT, again, oral glucose tolerance test with IAD PSG's criteria means they give us 75 grams glucose load and check. But as per the DIPSI guidelines, but since again we all understand at a public facility, it's not possible for the women to be there from fasting to things. So they just walk in. Whenever they come in, a 75-gram glucose load is given, as 2-hour reading is taken. So both these, the cutoff should be less than 140. Now that is 2 hours. For IAD PSG, that is OGTT, it is fasting less than 92, first hour less than 180, and second hour less than 153. Any one of these readings, if they are of the range, they are categorized as gestational diabetes. And the first line of treatment is medical nutrition therapy. So any mother in pregnancy, if she has a deranged blood sugars, the first 2 weeks has to be medical nutrition therapy. Now, this is for women who are not diabetic. All women who are diabetic and have got pregnant, that is a different criteria. They will be having the medications all. So, medical nutrition therapy has to concentrate mainly first on their timing of eating, their quality of their food based on which stage or which month of pregnancy they are, and quantity, very important at each meal, because the glycemic load matters on the load that they're eating. And the fourth thing is physical activity. These are the 4 key principles that we need to implement for the medical nutrition therapy for a gestational diabetes. What would be the timing? We have to give them every 2.5 to 3 hours a small meal. A small meal means low glycemic index of complex carbs with adequate protein and fiber. So the trend, again, you must have heard from a metabolic syndrome when we talk, follow the order of eating pattern. Start with give them the major meal, start with the fiber and protein, then move to give them the complex carbs, the vegetables, and finally the dairy source. So it's always better to advise them on the order of eating, of starting with a salad with a protein source. Anything with fiber with protein, then moving on. So postprandial values can be managed better. Small frequent meals, when I say, so there should be 3 major meals, breakfast, lunch, dinner, along with at least 2 or 3 snacks given, concentrating more on the dietary protein to give them the satiety. All the foods that are high in sugars, even including sugar, honey, jaggery, completely to be avoided. All processed baked items to be avoided. Refined maida products, of course. Fruit juices completely to be avoided. We advise them only whole fruits within the quantity of approximately 100 grams. It's better to give the carbohydrate load of the fruits and tell them each fruit how much to take. So if it's an apple, 75 grams, so half a medium apple. So that has to be explained when it comes to fruits. Vegetables, the roots and tubers to be avoided. But when it comes to millets, which can be included even in the pregnancy diet, go by what they can take, not otherwise. Because it's very important to include these foods which they are already used to, right? They should be taking, not starting a millet suddenly and have a stomach upset. Among the millets, only ragi has to be avoided because it has a slightly higher moderate glycemic index. So ragi, usually pregnancy, everyone knows it's a good source of calcium and iron. So basically they start taking it. But then for a gestational diabetic, the spiking in sugars is noticed. So avoid ragi for the gestational diabetic. All of the millets as tolerated can be taken. But it is the portion control which is important. Inclusion of vegetables and the dairy products, as I said, has to be managed even in a gestational diabetic diet. Walking, especially walking after meals, helps in postprandial reduction of sugars. So even 10 to 15 minutes, half an hour after every meal, after breakfast, after lunch, after dinner can be advised. So they will be able to keep their postprandial values in control. In case after 2 hours of 2 weeks of MNT, the values are still high. So we ask them to do a self-monitoring of home monitoring of blood sugars. So if the capillary blood, the cutoff is fasting less than 95 and 2 hours after the meal less than 120. So any of the readings, if they are high, we ask them to meet the endocrinologist for them to decide if they are starting on the oral supplements or insulin. Depends on the readings or depends on the blood sugar readings. So the diet continues till they birth on the same lines, right? Coming to thyroid, hypothyroid is a common condition. Again, commonly, when I say common, I say there is women who have already been hypothyroid and get pregnant. Most of the time, women come to know that they're hypothyroid in the first trimester, actually. So for these women, we always have to guide them on, there is no major change in their diet. They can actually eat a balanced diet as per the stage of their pregnancy, which trimester they are. We only ask them to limit on the goitrogenic vegetables, cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, lettuce as a salad vegetable. It doesn't mean that you have taken a sabji of it 2 weeks mein ek bar, there is no problem. But as a salad vegetable, large loads of broccoli, lettuce is what we ask them to avoid. Coming to the soya products, again, it's better to keep them limited. I'm not saying completely avoid. It depends on if they are a pure vegetarian and no other protein sources, then weekly once soy product is okay because we are only telling them 30 grams of the soy product. But all others have to be only limited and not avoided. Other thing is taking care of their iodine content in the thing. So we always stress not only for the hypothyroid, but all pregnant mothers to use iodized salt. The limit is 5 grams per day. So use iodized salt in their cooking. So that takes care of the iodine, which is so important for them generally in pregnancy and more so for the hypothyroid group. Coming to hypertension, if it's a pregnancy-induced hypertension, again, around 14 to 20 weeks is where we notice the change. But otherwise, we need to look at from the point of if they are already pregnant, they are hypertensive and they got pregnant, they will be on either 1 or 2 antihypertensives. We need to be aware of what their medications are and guide them on it. So the diet again will be a low glycemic index, trying to look at moderate protein and antioxidants, which will help them in that. So we are trying to include anti-inflammatory foods. So for those on hypertension, there's no restriction of salt. So like in a non-pregnant thing, we say this one, we do not reduce salt. We only ask them to avoid the high salt foods. So what I'm talking is we'll ask them to avoid the papads, the pickles, the baked items. So anything preserved which has excess salt is what we ask them to avoid. Even the ketchups, all these would have. But anything which is used as into the cooking, we ask them to avoid it as a shaker salt. So over the salad, we ask them don't use it, don't sprinkle your salt, only till that limit. But 1 teaspoon of salt for a hypertensive is new to be used. No other restrictions. We have to encourage them to eat more vegetables and fruits. Now, more fruits, when I say, again, even for a hypertensive, we don't talk of fruit juices. Fresh fruits, 2 to 3 servings per day will give them the good antioxidant rich food. And vegetables, they can include a bowl of fresh vegetable salad and not getting from out. So the remaining diet, we will look at a low glycemic index food source. Coming to sleep and disturbances that we notice in pregnancy, this is more to do with, of course, again, if they are having a lot of hormonal imbalances and that causing the thing that has to be addressed. But generally, as pregnancy advances, women have the challenge of a lot of baby movements, and so they have this as a challenge. We usually ask them to, as I earlier said, take short walks after the meal if they're feeling heavy in that respect. Or we actually ask them to have an early dinner anyway. So we always suggest to finish their dinner by 8 o'clock, 7 to 8 should be dinner time, so that they get a 2 hours gap after which they can actually take a small quantity of milk, tell them on the haldi doodh, which can be helpful. The use of chamomile tea, I would not know. I don't have any evidence to say that we don't, non-pregnant, non-lactating, it's all okay. But during pregnancy, there's a lot of other hormonal changes. We would not want to introduce the so-called herbal things. But again, I go by if the woman is already being used to it, she can continue. We do not want her to start something new and cause a disturbance. But otherwise, natural sources like allowing them to have a little warm, because that's the tryptophan which will help. So warm milk at night helps. You can ask them to have some nuts like pistachios because the melanin content has shown to help. And asking them to switch off all the Wi-Fi's and the blue light, this one, because most of them are so hooked to their mobiles and TVs. So that also sometimes does cause a lot of challenge. So we ask them to actually start practicing to switch off lights, sleep, lie down, and take on. And of course, exercise in terms of walking and all also helps them to catch up on some sleep. For the women, as you all said, some questions as I see are pregnancy after 35 years. Yes, advanced maternal age is now more commonly seen. For this group, the only thing we all have to be observant is their metabolic parameters, their body weight. They have to look at definitely how the other parameters are, that is their diabetes, their cardiovascular condition. So we definitely will go very seriously into these parameters, and any small change in their clinical parameters. We get women who have borderline lipids. They do come with 200 and 220 total cholesterol. So we do have to address, because after the age of 35, you should expect there would be small changes in their metabolism. So accordingly, dietary modifications have to be done. And weight is a major challenge for these women if they have started pregnancy, if they have started pregnancy at a higher BMI. Because if they have started at a BMI above 30, we need to be very carefully monitoring them month after month to see that they are not increasing. See, mind you, we cannot make them lose weight in pregnancy. So if they come to us after 10 kgs of weight gain in the 4th month itself, I can't do anything to make them lose weight. So we talk to them about restricting their weight gain. We don't ask them to lose weight. We ask them to continue eating the pattern that I just explained. But weight target will be only 1 kg per month or less than 1 kg per month. So we do not allow or recommend on any weight loss in pregnancy, even if their weight gain or even if their BMI has been higher. We need to manage them at the static weight or less weight gain is what we. I hope I've covered all these and these.
Yes, ma'am, you have covered everything related to
Right.
this topic. And thank you. Before we close, can we take some live questions? You have
Yeah.
answered most of the questions. If you can check the live questions in the chat, ma'am, and
Yeah.
answer 2 or 3 questions because we are running out of time.
True, I just noticed that. I will just take questions which are not answered actually.
Which one, ma'am?
No, I'm seeing where is it is in the chat box. Where is the questions? Yeah.
It's in the chat box in the Zoom itself. If you open the
Right,
chat,
got it.
yeah.
So the question on if antenatal mother, how to manage overweight, ma'am, I've already covered that. How to control postprandial blood glucose in gestational diabetic. As I told you, the most important thing is first target on their order of eating. Ask them to start eating first the fiber and the protein. So take fiber plus protein first, then give them the carbohydrate source, complex carbohydrate. It can be either the rotis or it can be dalia or it can be brown rice in the quantities that you are deciding on based on the carbohydrate distribution, right? And walking after the meal, at least 10 minutes walk after, don't not immediately, they can sit for half an hour, and 10 minutes if they walk also, it helps them in managing their postprandial glucose. And GDM diet, I think Aruna I have covered on. For women with high BP in third trimester, as I said, what we look at is an antioxidant-rich diet. Sometimes we have also used beetroot, a great source of nitrate. So you can include, if they are comfortable, you can include a beetroot juice for them. That also helps. But remember, high BP in third trimester is more to be managed medically. Don't intervene. Some women always think that, oh, just I don't want medicines, tell me on the diet. It doesn't work. It is a hormonal related push. So we should allow them and encourage and counsel them to follow doctor's advice. They have to take the medication. Along with the medication, we are supporting in better utilization. Yeah.
Directly.
How can, I'm sorry, Aruna.
Yeah. So ma'am, we can take 3 questions only.
How can we replace a conventional fat-rich special meals post-delivery? Exactly. That's a valid question. Yes. This is a big challenge that all of us who are counseling the postnatal mothers have, because everyone thinks now that the pregnancy is over and they have to eat more and to breastfeed, right? So basically, this is a big concept that we all as dietitians have to be counseling the mother. We are not asking them to eat less. We all know the highest calorie requirement in the women's nutritional dissonance, highest is here. So additional 540 calories to 600 calories in the lactation phase. We have to give them additional calories, but not additional fats. This traditional thing of bahut zara ghee de dena, ya bahut zara. So that is the concept we should discourage, especially if they have already been gestational diabetic, hypertensive. Please tell them it is going to cause more problems. They might become over diabetes. They might continue with their hypertension. So we should encourage them to eat a balanced diet with adequate complex carbs, good protein, fats to be included, but the healthy fat options, and eat to appetite. No less eating, no starvation, anything. If every 3 hours they should be eating, as per their, there will be an increased appetite, but they should limit on their fat intake to 4 to 5 teaspoons only, right? Yeah, women who have vomiting issues throughout the pregnancy. Yes, that happens because we call that as hyperemesis. So dietary modifications here has to be customized to the need of the women. So if the woman is actually not tolerating certain smells, flavors, we have to just avoid the entire thing. We have no other go there, right? So completely we have to avoid all these type of things. But we have to always remember that we have to still be aware to, are there this one's going on, that is, are they ready for in which month of their pregnancy they are. So we have definitely have to see if they are meeting their dietary requirement. But sometimes it becomes a challenge. As I told, there will be an inadequacy. That is why we might have to use a oral nutrition supplement if they are not able to get the entire nutrition required for the which stage of pregnancy. We have to support them. Sometimes, as you know, with hyperemesis, they will have to be on IV support, and then we give them options like absolutely liquids doesn't go in. So we make things like we make ice cubes of lime ice cubes, allow them to suck on it. So we use various small tips like this. So as we know, when there is vomiting, we try to ask them to eat dry foods. So these are small changes which we have to do, but it is highly customized to the patient's requirement.
Thank you, ma'am. So
Yeah, I
these are the
think
topics where we can speak the entire day.
I know. As I told you, for me, it is basically each topic of yours is 1 hour, so that is how it is. Placenta previa, there is no food to avoid, guys. I mean, it's a myth. And even the seed cycling to help in PCOS, there is no conclusive evidence. There is nothing wrong in guiding your client for using it, but there's no conclusive evidence. It might work for one woman, it might not work for other women. Anyway, seeds and nuts are definitely important for all the hormones, so you can use it. But as seed cycling, I have not found a conclusive evidence yet. Okay. Thank you.
So before we close, ma'am, can I request 3 final take-home messages for our.
So basically now, what we need to look at is from a point of, as I said, preconception, nutrition has to be looked at. I hope I made it clear that how important preconception nutrition is. So that is my first take-home message, that we need to be looking at, ideally before conception, the nutritional status and guiding them. Second, fertility nutrition, what we are talking of, is definitely has to be customized, individualized, because there might be PCOS, there might be risk of diabetes based on their weight if they're underweight. So all the nutrition that we're talking for helping them in improving fertility is customized to the condition that they have. And I always would say that nutrition should not be treated as a optional add-on in fertility and maternal. It is a most important, the cornerstone of treatment or inclusion in the diet of, in the life, the course of the pregnancy treatment. So these are the 3 that I thought we should take on with. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Lata ma'am, for very insightful session. And we are grateful to all the participants for their thoughtful questions, and to Lata ma'am for covering all the things in detail. And please wait for the coming series also. I just want you to share that we are coming with our next series, that is 2.0 series, where we'll cover the onco nutrition, neuro nutrition, critical care nutrition, nutrition and diabetes, and pediatric nutrition. Okay, so there again we will have wonderful speakers like Lata ma'am. We have Shiv Shankar sir, and we have uh, Dr. PC Vijay Kumar, Datta Patel, Priya Jetali, and Priya Shahji. So again, very good speakers coming, and the last date is approaching. I request everyone, please register. And in the last, I again want to thank you, Lata ma'am, for the wonderful session.
Thank you, Sarabjit. I should also thank you for making it. So this one, when I saw an array of questions, I was actually wondering how I will. You did a great job in compiling them together and grouping them and setting them. I hope the listeners were able to get a gist of it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Can we take one
Thank you so
complete
much,
group?
ma'am.
Can
Right.
everyone can turn on their cameras and we can have one group photograph.
उससे बात करने की जिम्मेदारी थी तुम्हारी हम आपने देखिए
Okay. So thank you, ma'am. So see you in the next
Thank you,
session, and I
Thank you.
request all the participants to please register for 2.0 series. That will be again a
The
very
link
insight.
for that, sir.
We will share that in the group. So we will share again in the group.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Lata ma'am, please save it. Record.
Yeah, where is that?
मैम वो 3 डॉट दिख रहे हैं ना,
हाँ.
वहां पे रिकॉर्डिंग है, क्लाउड में सेव करना।
सेटिंग्स में जाना है क्या?
पार्टिसिपेंट्स के साइड में 3 डॉट्स है, मोर।
या वो में रिकॉर्ड है. Record it is, and then where is the
रिकॉर्ड को ऑफ करना है।
off करना है? हाँ. Stop recording, नहीं?
यस, एंड सेव इन क्लाउड।
Are you sure you want to stop recording to the cloud?
यस।